Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Lopes on Movies. We are finally back after our 2-week hiatus while I was off playing every Beatles song for, Beatle Fest, which was a great time. It was a great time.
It was good.
Hey, Connor, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Joey. Beatles Fest was a huge success, last year.
Yes, it was. But I will say I missed the show, because there's been some interesting developments in film while we were gone. So I'm glad to be back, and
yes,
we can finally talk about them. Which, of course, the biggest one is everybody will know. If you're a movie person, then obviously every time Quentin Tarantino releases a movie, whether or not that's a thing that you appreciate, it definitely, will definitely raise a few eyebrows.
Wait, Joey. Well, I thought we were going to be talking about The Lion King.
No, we're not going to do that.
Oh.
I mean, unless you just want this episode to be very, very upsetting and negative.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I guess we'll get to that a little bit later anyway. Oh, man. But let's talk about something that actually brings us joy. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the new Quentin Tarantino film. Connor, how about you give us a synopsis of this beautiful new film?
Okay, absolutely. So this is from IMDb. A faded television actor and his stunt double strive to achieve fame and success in the film industry during the final years of Hollywood's golden age in 1969 Los Angeles. This is the 9th film directed and written by Quentin Tarantino and stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie in leading roles. Joey, remember Movie Stars?
Yeah, man. Can you believe this?
I can't.
So the theme of this episode is going to be a little bit twofold, I think. One, we're going to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I think both of us, and Kyle, by the way, Kyle can't be here on the episode because he's away doing something today, but he wanted us to know, or wanted everybody to know that he liked the film. But both of us really liked it. But my kind of takeaway after I left the theaters, I thought that I really, really loved it, but I wasn't sure if that was because it was a truly great movie or if it's just because it's a real movie. And that feels like such a novelty these days. It's not like, so every movie that we've reviewed on this show, save for Godzilla King of the Monsters, has been quote unquote a real movie. But this is the first movie I've seen in a while that feels so distinct and like a very rich piece of art that is worth engaging with and thinking about in a serious way, which is what got me into movies in the first place way back in high school when I was so into film and would seek out directors and want to watch everything that they ever made and just engage with their body of work. This is the first time in forever that I've seen a movie in theaters that reminded me of that feeling, regardless of whether or not it's a great film. And I mean, my gut is telling me that it is. The fact that it had that effect on me, that it reminded me of what it was like to fall in love with movies in the first place and want to watch them.
Yes.
It's fascinating to me that feeling it's been so long since I've had that from a new movie, and the writing is on the wall that feeling will continue to diminish as the years go on.
Right. I mean, it doesn't help that this movie it pretty much came out the same time as Lion King, which is the polar opposite of this film.
Yeah, The Lion King is indicative of all of the worst possible trends in Hollywood. Remaking something in a creatively bankrupt and disgusting way. Just trying to bank on something that had already been done before, released by the Disney Corporation. I mean, it's got pretty much everything that can possibly be terrible in one production. But of course, it makes, about $5 bazillion, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like this is what cinema is now. It's not Quentin Tarantino. He's it's funny that this movie is kind of about an aging and trying to relive the glory days almost, or remember how you used to be, because it feels like this is almost like a eulogy for the art of filmmaking, because it's going away, and it's rapidly going away.
Yes.
So,
all right.
Again, yeah. This is watching something like this just it made me nostalgic for a time when movies were movies.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's get into it to
Sure.
like actually explain what we mean by that.
So
Okay.
the basic idea of this film, we're gonna follow three main characters through roughly 2 days of their lives. Okay, so the first main character, Rick Dalton, is played by Leonardo DiCaprio. He is an aging TV star who fears that he's sort of become a has-been. Around this period in Hollywood history, there was this big transition from the old kind of leading men types, for like the John Wayne types, to more like younger, scruffier, like hippie types, kind of like typified by movies like Easy Rider. And what was kind of happening a lot was you would have these TV actors that would somehow be able to make the transition to film, which was at that time considered a more prestigious and like, a better place to be for your career if you're a film star versus a TV star. So Rick Dalton's one of those people who was never able to make that transition. He remained a TV star, and he's feared that his time has kind of come. So we follow him mainly through his performance as a guest star on a TV episode where he's sort of playing the villain of the week. So Brad Pitt plays Rick Dalton's stunt double, Cliff Booth, who is basically just kind of Dalton's guy. It's kind of the best way I can describe it.
Right.
He's his right-hand man. He does things for him, and Dalton pays him, but they're basically like as tight as two men can be. Like the movie describes a relationship as more than a brother but less than a wife. So they're it's very, very close relationship.
Yeah. And it's also like he's like the strong man. Like he's totally with it, knows what's going on. And Rick Dalton, who is Leonardo DiCaprio, is like kind of is living nothing in but self-doubt at this point.
Yes.
He's like coming to grips with the fact that he knows that he's becoming a has-been, and he thinks that his life is almost over at this point. And then you have Cliff, who's Brad Pitt's character, who's just trying to bring him up. Like, come on, man, you're Rick Dalton. You can do this. You can do this, man. Exactly. Come on. Because he also knows that he needs him to work so that he actually can get jobs, So as
it's true, but it's a surprisingly moving central relationship just between those two in a very like subtle and amusing way.
Yes.
Anyway, lastly, so we have
and
Margot
maybe most
Robbie.
importantly,
perhaps most importantly, we have Margot Robbie playing Sharon Tate, who was the actress that was infamously murdered by the Manson family at the tail end of the 60s, which that whole event is sort of this. It almost signaled the end of the optimism of the 60s and like the whole idea of peace and love and like the whole hippie culture and everything like that. So that event kind of casts a shadow over the entire movie, where if you're aware of it, because obviously there's going to be a lot of young people that see this that might not even know that was a thing. I think they're going to be very confused.
And we'll get into that.
But it's a crucial bit of historical context that informs pretty much everything that's going on in the movie, even though the storylines that we follow with Rick Dalton, Cliff Booth, and Sharon Tate are all completely separate until the very end of the movie where they kind of converge. So those are the three main characters, and that's sort of the gist of the movie. And like I said, we're basically just following them through 1 or 2 days of their lives and what kind of happens during those 2 days until they eventually, all the stories converge at the end of one night.
Right.
So really, like, the core of the movie is this idea of like the two different generations, the one generation represented by Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, and the other generation represented by Sharon Tate, and how Rick Dalton and his generation is sort of on the way out, and Sharon Tate's generation is sort of on the way up, and the way the movie kind of reconciles those two different ideas and two different periods of history and this period of transition is through this horrific Manson family event that will obviously be playing a major factor at some point in the film. So that's sort of the basic gist.
So Connor, I guess and I guess it's also a good point to mention that so Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth is almost completely separate from Sharon Tate's story throughout the entire film until the very end, like almost completely separate.
Yeah,
and like you were saying before, if you're not familiar with the Sharon Tate murder by the Manson family, which I only had a passing knowledge of, it's not going to be the same experience, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it ruins it for you. The critics are saying that if you don't understand what happened to Sharon Tate, then you're not going to get what's going on in this. And even so, they almost act as though Sharon Tate's inclusion in the film was not warranted, or it feels kind of like thrown in.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that
because it's almost so separate. From because the majority of the film we're following Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, and what they're doing on these 2 days. It kind of feels like and Tarantino has described these kind of films before, like a hangout kind of movie where you're just kind of with these characters going through their day-to-day interactions, or what they're going through on a particular afternoon driving around. Like there's long stretches where it's just Brad Pitt in a car driving around, and it's great.
Oh, it's great. It's amazing.
It's wonderful.
Oh, it's so good.
This is clearly such like a, it sounds cliche, but it's like, it really is like a love letter to old Hollywood that Tarantino grew up with. I know he was very young but he has this photographic memory of what Hollywood was like to him when he was growing up, because he lived in Los Angeles. He knows, like it's ingrained in his soul, and there's like the whole film is just a longing for it to get back to that time, like looking back on it fondly. And when you get to the ending of the film, it's almost like something he's done before, where it kind of plays with history, like in Inglourious Basterds, but it's different this time because not everybody knows what happened to Hitler, but and the difference that he, the change for Inglourious Basterds and the change that he does here, which I'm not going to get into exactly, but it's almost it feels very
too much into spoilers. Like the movie is basically like, it's kind of like a fantasy version of the events of that time period.
Well, it's a fairy tale. This movie is called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it feels like it's amazing that it felt like a fairy tale to me at the end. Of what he wishes this could have been, what Hollywood could have been.
That's sort of what you get. There's a tremendous amount of warmth by the end of it, in a kind of a subversive way, because I mean, this is a Quentin Tarantino movie. Like I'm not going to pretend like that this is like some super like just beautiful, optimistic, and lovely film, which it is, but it's also horrifically violent at points, and very subversive, and it has some thorny edges to it. There's like, for example, like Brad Pitt's character, he's extremely cool and collected, and he has this kind of charisma that like you never see in movies these days. But his character is not as simple as just like, he's just awesome and we love him. I mean, there's shades of gray to who he is. For example, like there's a point in the movie where it's hinted at that he may or may not have killed his wife, and we never get an answer of whether or not he actually did. We never know. So there's this little bit of a little bit of a side to that makes you have to step back a little bit from just being 100%. You have to approach it with some distance. But I love that kind of stuff. I love when a movie isn't just 100%. This is the easy answers. This is what it is. You have to think about it. You have to kind of take in everything, and let that inform the way that you feel about it. Anyway, the point being that the end of the movie is surprisingly warm, and it's almost bittersweet, because again, like without getting too much into spoilers, just knowing what actually happened in reality, both with the Sharon Tate murder scenario with the Manson family, and just in terms of what Hollywood has turned into and what Hollywood used to be. And like that disconnect between the reality and what the film posits is very bittersweet. And despite the movie coming out in this complete level of optimism for the future, like just knowing what we're actually living with, what did happen, is this, it creates this beautiful kind of melancholy to the end of the movie, and it's stuck with me for since we saw it. Like
it's still with me too. I want to see it like right now. Once we're done this, I want to go and see it again.
The initial thought that I've been having after watching it was, it made me think and want to think about it more than any Tarantino movie has since I first saw Pulp Fiction back in high school, because that's another movie where there's so many layers to it. If you're willing to kind of think about it and dig into it, it just feels like a very vital movie. And this had the same feeling to me, where it just made me want to think about it, and it makes me want to see it again and just approach it from as many angles as I can. Yeah, it's a rich piece of work.
Yes, but I mean, clearly it's not for everyone, because not everybody is totally down with this. I think
certainly not.
Like, one thing I'll say too, it's like, this to me is a comedy before anything else. Also,
oh yeah, there's a lot of very, very funny moments.
This is probably Tarantino's funniest movie, I would say, and he's always had, like, he's an amazing writer. He the dialogue that he puts on the page, that actors want to be in his films. No one says no to a Tarantino movie, like, because they want to read his dialogue, and this is the funniest one that I've seen, and they're all fairly funny.
Yeah, to me, it's funny in like a human interest sort of way. Like, just seeing how Rick Dalton kind of reacts to his lot in life.
Yes,
is both like kind of funny in an amusing way, but also in a relatable kind of way.
Yes, it is.
I think we've all had feelings, not unlike the feelings that Rick Dalton goes through many times in the movie.
And so I want to say also, I don't really like Leonardo DiCaprio. I know that's like sacrilegious if you like film, sort of. But this is the greatest thing I think he's ever been in.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah,
I think
I think Rick Dalton is a truly spectacular character, and Leonardo DiCaprio plays him with this just absolute conviction. It's a 100%, joy to behold.
100%. It's such a. It feels like it came from his soul. Like, this is like the best thing he's ever done, I think.
For sure.
Yeah, Oscar pick.
Yeah, right.
This is the one he should have won Best Actor for.
Yeah, not The Revenant, whatever that movie was about. I didn't see it. I'm sure it was bad.
No, not that.
But I mean, Brad Pitt too. I mean, Brad Pitt is the old Hollywood ideal of a leading man in the modern era.
Movie stars,
you know. And it's you think about how Hollywood used to operate on the idea of movie stars, where it wasn't whatever the movie was about or whatever the movie was based on that made people want to go see it. It was about who was in it. You know, people followed people, basically. So, like, I mean, back in like the way older times, you had like a Humphrey Bogart type of guy where, you know, he's been in so many different kinds of movies. People would go to see him just to see the Humphrey Bogart type. They wanted to see him in a movie, right?
Right.
And that's how Hollywood used to operate until
Jimmy Stewart. Anyone like there's
Jimmy Stewart. Yeah, no, for sure.
So
Cary
many
Grant,
examples.
But in the modern era, we had those guys too. We had like Bruce Willis types. We had Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 80s.
We had Harrison Ford for a stretch.
Harrison Ford. And then in the more modern era, we had people like Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. But those guys, like, they alone don't sell movies anymore. Like, the biggest movies of forever are you know like The Lion King, which, you know, they have like famous people in it, but nobody cares who's in it. It's because it's The Lion King and they know what that is. Or you have these superhero movies that have these kind of charisma black holes of actors in them, which are not that they're like bad actors, but like, you know, you watch a movie like this and you're like, okay, Brad Pitt or Chris Hemsworth. It's like you could throw Chris Hemsworth in the dumpster. Like, no. Like, I could go never seeing Chris Hemsworth again for the rest of my life if it meant that we could get just 3 more movies with somebody as charismatic as Brad Pitt in them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Alas, you know, we're kind of at this tipping point where the people don't matter, the stars don't matter, the filmmakers don't matter. All that really matters is the brand, right? It doesn't matter who's playing Spider-Man anymore. As long as it's Spider-Man, I'm going to go see it, right?
Well, not you, but...
Well, not
actually,
me.
Yeah, not me either.
Me saying for mass audiences.
Oh, of course, yes. How about how many stars are in this film, too? Like,
oh my God,
people
it's huge.
Who wanted... There were so many stars. There were stars cut out of the film who just didn't make it in. But just the list now, because you know, you have Leo, you have Brad Pitt, you have Margot Robbie, you have, you know, Timothy Olyphant, you know, there's Dakota Fanning is in this.
Yeah.
Bruce Dern, Luke Perry is in this. Luke Perry's like last film.
Small roles, but they
Damian Lewis is in this playing Steve McQueen. Al Pacino's in this. Like, come on.
It's because it's the kind of like people wanted to work with Quentin Tarantino because
Right.
he's a person who's making challenging and interesting films. He's an artist. And I know that that's kind of a surprising thing to be in the modern film industry, but that's what Quentin Tarantino is. And again, like I think the key distinction here is not that there aren't art films being made, because there are. And I feel like
Yes, but they're not backed by studios.
right. It's really important that we clarify that the problem with Marvel and Disney is not the fact that they exist. It's the fact that their existence is basically suffocating the entire film industry and preventing artists like Tarantino from being successful. Because the only like there's data that backs this up, that movies that are not based on existing franchises barely make any money. So anymore, like almost none at all compared to Disney, which has this insane market share of like theater revenue. So you have audiences that only want to see these existing brands, and that's a problem for the idea of film as just an art made by artists that are telling stories that they want to tell, right? It becomes more of a business. And whenever the scales tip too far on the business side and too far away from the art side is when I get really cynical. And that's sort of where we're at right now, where the only movies that can get made by artists that want to tell stories, like their own stories or stories written by somebody that isn't based on some existingly already famous property, the only like avenue for that is in very, very low budget filmmaking, which
Right,
is why
and you have
like,
to
people
nail
like,
it too.
right, which is why people like Ari Aster can make, Midsummer, which is a horror movie, because horror movies still make money regardless of, how much whatever they're based on. It doesn't matter, but they're very low budget, right? And there's only certain kinds of movies you can make at such a low budget. So that's why the only real innovation that's happening in the film industry right now is pretty much in that low budget like horror movie area. And that's disappointing because like when you're so limited by what you're capable of doing, because the big studios aren't going to back you unless you're making a franchise movie.
Right.
Like,
yeah, there's so few directors. Right. There's so few directors that get this. Right. There's Tarantino who's left. Scorsese was left, and we'll get into him maybe a little bit.
Well, Scorsese's barely left because like the only people that would give him money is Netflix.
Right, I know,
which is ridiculous.
There's a few left that can actually make what they want to do,
but it's very few.
Yeah,
it's very
That's why
few.
I really like Damien Chazelle. I think is one of both of our favorite filmmakers because
he's very lucky.
He is so lucky because he is a very young guy and he was able to break through that with his success with Whiplash, which was made with a fairly low budget. Mm-hmm. And then from there, he made La La Land, which was not a huge budget, but it's still a pretty big budget. And then, that now allowed him to kind of navigate through to be able to, be one of these guys who can get a big budget to make a film.
But the idea of a studio coming to some guy and saying, hey, we don't understand you. We don't understand what you're doing, but audiences are interested in whatever you're doing. Here's a ton of money. Do something. That used to be how it worked. In the 70s, this was huge. This was like, that's how Star Wars happened. And Star Wars is sort of like almost what ruined the film industry in kind of a funny way, because it's a really great film. But that's basically what it was. Like George Lucas, he had made some money from American Graffiti. People were interested in seeing movies from him, and he came to Fox and said, I want to make a sci-fi fantasy adventure film. And they're like, okay, here's $1 gazillion, go do it. And it was that simple. But they don't do that anymore. Now it's like they want to keep the artist out of the process because they want to minimize any kind of risk. And audiences seem to be cool with that. Like it's almost like we've willingly given up the idea of the artist as filmmaker, which some people would argue is a good thing. I would argue it's disgusting and basically makes film like completely negligible and forgettable. And so this is why something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood feels so urgent when when you see it, because it's so rare to see this kind of thing in a theater anymore. Like a big budget film with stars that is trying to be something that isn't trying to be something for everybody, but is just a very peculiar, subversive, thorny piece of work that you have to engage with and think about, and that actually might mean something in your life. Like that's right. Can you believe that a movie was released in 2019 that had that effect? It blows my mind.
Yeah,
it blows my mind.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that this is my favorite movie of the year, obviously, so far, and I can't imagine I'm going to like anything more than this.
The only thing that has potential, I think, is Scorsese's The Irishman.
Right, and that's the most right. So then, I guess we're talking about Disney, the inevitable takeover, perhaps, of the film industry by Disney. Is there any hope, Joey? Like, do you think? I'm holding on to hope that The Irishman, which is this movie that's coming out from Scorsese, that's direct to Netflix, but I think it's going to have a small theater release too. But it's going to be on Netflix. Mm-hmm. It's financed by Netflix. Mm-hmm. I think that this is our last ditch effort, but the last hope for film. You know,
it kind of is. I mean, I hate to be so pessimistic about the film industry, but it really truly has never been in a worse place. And maybe that's kind of a ridiculous thing for somebody who's in his 20s to say. I've only been alive for a very brief period of film history, so there's only so much I can say with any kind of authority. But I genuinely don't think that the landscape of film has ever been quite this artistically bankrupt. And it's, as somebody that really, really loves film as a medium for storytelling and its potential to move people and mean something, that's very, very upsetting. But again, I mean, who knows? This stuff comes in ebbs and flows. You know, it's very possible that at some point people will get sick of being spoon-fed content from giant corporations. But I mean, I don't see any end in sight, at least not yet. And again, it's I don't have any problem with the existence of a superhero movie. I most of the Marvel movies that I've seen, I've liked well enough. It's just we're at this point where we have to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, this is a problem. The fact that these movies are literally suffocating the industry and preventing studios from doing anything but trying to make their own cinematic universes and creatively bankrupt franchises and basically leaving all of the artists out to dry, that's a problem. That's a very, very big problem. And just because these movies are baseline competent and fun, I don't think that's enough to say oh, it's totally fine. You know, it's totally fine. Don't worry about it. They're still making good movies. They are, but man, who knows for how much longer.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Thank God. It's a good thing we have these small studios which are still, giving smaller budgets, but something at least to these filmmakers, like these $5 million budgets, like Blumhouse even, or what is it, A24?
Yeah.
That are still, financing filmmakers to make, their own movie that's not totally studio driven. It's
the future. The future. I don't know what the future has for cinema, but anyway, I think that's pretty much all the time we got.
It is, but can we try to lift it up a little bit now?
Go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because it's a really, really good movie.
Yes, it is.